Welcome to the Student Affairs One Thing, a podcast that asks a simple question of seasoned student affairs professionals. What is one thing you have learned that has helped shape your professional career? I'm your host, Stuart Brown, founder of studentaffairs.com, one of the most accessed websites by student affairs professionals. On our pages, we have the most cost-effective job posting board, listing hundreds of open student services positions, a wide range of webinars, and a virtual exhibit hall. We would like to thank our sponsor, the National Society of Leadership and Success, the largest leadership honor society in the nation, providing an accredited 5-step leadership development program for members to build their leadership skills. With chapters at over 700 colleges across the country, the NSLS delivers guaranteed student engagement, increased student retention, and is financially self-sustainable. Learn more at nsls.org/our-program. On today's episode, I am very pleased to have Dr. Larry Roper. He is Professor Emeritus in the School of Language, Culture, and Society at Oregon State University. Previously, he served as Vice Provost for Student Affairs. He has also served in the following positions: Director of Housing, Associate Dean of Students, Coordinator of Multicultural Affairs, and Vice President for Student Affairs, Dean of Students. So, Larry, I guess that qualifies you for being a seasoned student affairs professional. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. Yes, and I have the salt in my hair to prove that I am seasoned. So, yes.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, this is an audio podcast, but we'll have the viewers and maybe we'll post a picture of you on the website so people can see that you are definitely a seasoned professional. So, what is your one thing?
That education can save lives. I attended I grew up in Akron, Ohio. The first person in my family to go to college. People talk about being a first generation college student, where I was a first generation high school graduate. My family, neither of my parents graduated from high school. So I made the decision to attend a small school, Heidelberg College, about 100 miles away from where I grew up in Akron, Ohio. I had never spent a night away from home prior to going to college. So my brother, who also graduated the same year as I, who was actually going to be going off to Kent State University on a football scholarship, and a couple of friends of mine drove me to college and dropped me off. I lasted for 2 days and walked out to the interstate after 2 days and hitchhiked home with the idea that I was done with college. My mother had different perspective on that. And after being interrogated by her, she got me to confess that the reason I wanted to leave was because I was scared. And I said, I'm scared. And she asked me what I had to be afraid of. And I told her that when I laid down at night to try to fall asleep, I could hear crickets and I could hear birds. And she said, but that's just the sound of nature. And my instinctive response to her was, that's not what's natural to me. I'm used to hearing sirens. I'm used to hearing horns honking. I'm used to hearing loud music and glass breaking and people yelling. And that quiet is scary. And so she gave me an ultimatum, none of which involved staying in her house. So my cousin, she said, well, I'll have your cousin Harold take you back. So my cousin Harold, who's about 5 years older than me, drove me back through these country roads to this small rural town. And along the way, he said, shaking his head, said, I don't know, bro. They got these cottonwood trees out here. They be hanging brothers out here. And I said, Harold, I'm looking for courage. This is not helping. So he dropped me off, and I was playing football. And so I would, go to football practice, and then I would just I was just in the throes of just sort of like, it was sort of a depression, but it wasn't a diagnosed depression. But I certainly did not have energy for the college experience. Fortunately or unfortunately, halfway through the term, at the 7-week mark, they gave us a report card and basically said, if the term ended now, these would be your grades. I had a 0.75. And the dean of students called me in and said, Mr. Roper, Larry, you seem to be struggling. Let's talk about how I can be helpful. And I was absolutely embarrassed and ashamed because the context in which I grew up, I graduated from high school at the top of my class. And so nobody had ever had to talk to me about grades. Nobody ever talked to me about academic performance. And I was just absolutely humiliated. And I just sort of sucked it up and I said, I'll be fine. I said, thanks. I appreciate it. I tried to be as respectful as I can, but basically I was saying, get out of my face. I don't need your help. So I developed a routine where every day after football practice, I would go to our library, and they had where you could actually check out headphones because they had these turntables in the study carrels. And so I had 3 record albums. I would, take my albums, take my books, put on the headphones, and study. I ended up finishing the term, in the 2.8 point something GPA, and then obviously graduated there in very good standing and went right on to graduate school after that. But what I found out during that experience was that, first of all, the first time I encountered a world that was different than the world that I knew, my first instinct was to turn and run. At the end of that experience, and right now, when I look back on my professional formation, my experience at Heidelberg College was the best thing that ever happened to me. It introduced me to a world that I didn't know existed. It gave me knowledge, certainly, that I did not have prior to then, but it certainly gave me a career path that I never knew existed. And that more than anything, what it showed me was that education has incredible power to transform. And in some way, it saved my life. One of the things you didn't mention was that during my time at Oregon State University, I served a year and a half as the interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts. And when I was my first meeting with liberal arts faculty, they asked, "What do you know about the liberal arts?" And my first response was, "The liberal arts saved my life." And that's because of the power of education. So what happened through that, though, was that I found a success model. The dean of students who called me in began to model for me what I believe a successful educator looked like. He was incredibly empathic. He was caring. He was other-centered. It was all about other people to him. It was all about their success. And it was about him, quite frankly, reaching out to people and making sure that he did everything he could to give them a lifeline, that this is a source of hope, and this is a place where you can go for refuge. You can come to my office if you just need to get away from it. And so for me, I came out of that with an idea that education is life-giving and it's life-saving.
That is such a powerful story. And it really resonates with me, who's someone who has been in the field for many, many decades working with students. And I think people that listen to this podcast to understand that little episode where you were in the dean's office and maybe half listening because, like you said, you were embarrassed, but that changed your life, changed the direction. And then to be able to take that throughout your entire career, to understand that and to sort of go back to remember that. I think in the field, sometimes we don't recognize the influence that we might have over the students, that it is just a chance for them to maybe vent, listen. They don't know where to go. And these wayward students, sometimes they always seem to end up at the dean of students office. It's like, you don't know where to go. Hey, go to the dean of students. I don't know what they do, but just go to them.
Yep. And, and the thing I found was that, well, some people may say, well, he was just doing his job. For me, it wasn't like he called me in because it was his job, that he saw the numbers and it's like, I got to call in any student who's struggling. But in the end, when I reflect on it, it was such an act of service to humanity, and it was such an act of humanness that he was willing to reach out and to create space for me to be able to at least to ask for what I needed, or to give me an invitation to be able to say that I do need something. That for me was very powerful. And his name was Bob Olson. He's the Emeritus Dean of Students of Heidelberg. And, I had the privilege of serving on the board of trustees for Heidelberg for a number of years. And so I got to see him regularly and just reminded him that he was the model for my career. That when I thought about who I wanted to be Bob Olson.
Sometimes when we're looking at programs for the campus, what can we do? I think sometimes we get caught up in what's the latest fad or what can we do? And really, sometimes it's just going back to the basics.
Yes.
Being there to listen, to provide assistance. We don't have to answer or have all the answers, but just being able to have a space, like you said, for those students to come in. And like you did, you left and you said, okay, I need to solve my problem.
Yep.
And you were given the opportunity.
Yep. If he hadn't called me in, I would not have named my problem. I would have just gotten to the end of the term, and then I would have panicked at the end of the term when I saw my grades. Or maybe it would have been some point where I would have woke up myself and said, I got to get out of this. I got to get out of this, this malaise that I'm in.
So do you like crickets now, or do you still prefer sirens?
Well, I lived for 25 years in Corvallis, Oregon, which is where Oregon State University is. And so I've come to love crickets. I've come to love the outdoors.
Glad to hear that. Larry, I want to thank you for sharing that. That is, like I said, it was a powerful story that I hope people that listen to this podcast can really take as part of maybe what they need to do or to consider for their professional career in student affairs.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Student Affairs One Thing, a podcast that asks a simple question of seasoned student affairs professionals. What is one thing you have learned that has helped shape your professional career? My guest today has been Dr. Larry Roper. I've been your host, Stuart Brown, the developer of studentaffairs.com, one of the most accessed websites by student affairs professionals. I hope you will join us next time for another episode of the Student Affairs One Thing.